So we believe that individuals in a free society can make choices about their own personal habits. We believe they can eat what they want. Sometimes they do
always felt this way.
Yes, well.
Even when you weren't a libertarian congressman, you're running as a libertarian.
Yes, I was a libertarian congressman. I have always. I wouldn't say that when I was 22 I endorsed all the same views, but
were you a Democrat or Republican?
I was a Republican, but I was a libertarian Republican. I always voted a libertarian voting record.
No, so you believe that the government should stay out of our personal business altogether?
Yeah, this is correct.
All right, that's good, guys. It also happens to be my personal business if I want to kill my 4-year-old kid, right?
No, wait a minute, you're giving libertarian a distorted explanation.
No, sir. You people gave it to yourselves in your platform.
No, let me explain that. The answer is that we are allowed to do what we want. We even prevent people from smoking cigarettes, and that happens to be the most deadly drug in the United States today. It kills 320,000 people.
I appreciate it.
Maybe we ought to make it
I wish
illegal.
you'd ban it. I wish you'd ban it.
Good.
If you would, sir, I'd put it on your ride right now.
You can buy it out of the street and pay $5 a package. No, in a free society, we are allowed to make these choices. We can't protect us from ourselves, but there is a strict line that libertarians draw, and that is that you can't step over the bounds and injure somebody else. And this is what the drug laws are doing. They're overstepping the bound. Just the other day, they walked into somebody's house. They suspected he was a drug dealer. He was using his automatic selector, and then police marched in, and they said it looked like a gun after they killed the man.
Earlier,
let's see how much your hand is shaky. Hold it up so they can see how shaky it is.
Not shaky. Let me tell you something. Your people were hurt because drugs are illegal, not because they're legal. Face it.
Our people were hurt because someone took a baseball bat over a guy's head and took a knife and
That's right,
stabbed him.
because drugs are illegal.
No, our people were hurt because of Mr. Potato Heads like you, elitist white people who do not live in drug-infested neighborhoods. We are paying the price for your so-called freedom. What about my freedom to walk down the street without being accosted?
That's because they're illegal, you idiot. They're illegal.
Those laws, you people who support the laws, are the greatest protector of the drug dealer. The drug dealer under our system
You are the protector of the drug dealer, but you give them the business. We don't.
If you want to put the drug dealer out of business overnight, legalized drugs, there's no drug dealer. Why don't we have prohibition of alcohol? Who's for prohibition of alcohol?
Let me add that racism was here with us at the beginning of this country. It was here in the last century, and it's going to be with us in the 21st century. And one of the areas that touches me the most and enrages me the most is our war on drugs that this country has been putting forth for the last generation. In 1972, we had 179,000 human beings in jail in this country. Today, it's 2.3 million, and 70% of them are black African Americans. And I hope my colleagues will join me in standing up and saying, like FDR did with Prohibition, we'll do away with that. And FDR did it. And if I'm president, I'll do away with the war on drugs, which does nothing but savage our inner cities and put our children at risk. There's no reason for this. There's not an American that doesn't understand the culture and the understanding that Prohibition was a failure. And so we repeat it again, like we repeated Iraq after we had the failure of Vietnam. When will we learn? When will we learn that the issue of drugs is a public health issue? Addiction is a public health issue, not a criminal issue where we throw people in jail and criminalize them to no advancement to the people.
But the subject today is whether or not we should have a gold standard or whether we should follow the standard that we are using today, and that is the discretionary paper standard. And obviously I support the idea that it would be wiser to have a gold standard rather than a paper standard. And I think that, unfortunately, for those who believe in the paper standard, have one little problem. They have to defend what we have today, and they have to defend the soundness of the economy, the soundness of the dollars, and they have to explain why the interest rates are high and why the housing market's not doing so well. So I think they have a terrible job. And I'm in a much better position to say, well, we have another system, and the terrible thing that happened when we even had a little taste of a gold standard, we had that terrible situation where you had interest rates between 3 and 5%. So I would suggest that there are many, many advantages for the gold standard, and the specific things that are advantageous to us with the gold standard I'm not going to talk about in my opening remarks.
Is it a surprise to anybody in this room that if you don't have any money, you don't get any justice? Is that a surprise to you all? My gracious. The only way you're going to get justice is to turn around and empower yourselves to become lawmakers so you can change the system. And there's no thought of really changing the system today. It's politics as usual.
Senator Dodd?
I want to say that none of you are going to live in your lifetime to see our system of taxation changed based upon what you've heard here. I was 8 years on the Finance Committee. None of them have served on that committee. And I'll tell you, the code stands that high, and there's not a human being alive that understands it. And it's with Democrats, with Republicans, they take care of the people. You think it's an accident that all of a sudden we wake up that the wealthy aren't paying a fair share?
Congressman Ron Paul says, I don't want to run your life. I don't want to run the economy. And I don't want to police the world. What kind of presidential candidate says that? Suddenly you are this hot candidate with kids. The most Googled, you're big on the internet. You know what that's about?
Not completely. I love it. I always thought freedom ideas were young ideas. You know, in history, freedom is a young idea. Tyranny is an old idea. Young people tend to be more principled, and they like that, and they know I've been dedicated to the principles of the Constitution, and they welcome the idea of somebody that talks about leaving them alone, letting them run their own lives.
And leaving people alone is not something I often hear politicians talk about.
That's sad.
Stop and think what the opportunity cost. Now, you have heard these nostrums before. I've been watching your heads. You're nodding on all the programs. You've heard it 10 years ago. You've heard it 20 years ago. Why doesn't it change? The Democratic Party hasn't done appreciably better than the Republican Party in solving these problems. It has to be solved by the people, not by your leaders. Stop and think. When he's talking about the money we're squandering, 21 million Americans could have a 4-year college scholarship for the money we've squandered in Iraq. 7.6 million teachers could have been hired last year if we weren't squandering this money. Now, how do you think we got into this problem? The people on this stage, like the rest of us, are all guilty, and very guilty, and we should recognize that because there is linkage.
Senator Dodd? Yeah. Time is up. I'm sorry.
Have you ever heard a politician say he wants to take a pay cut and have the government he runs do less? Meet such a candidate, Congressman Ron Paul. What should government do?
Protect our freedoms, have a strong national defense, look and take care of our borders, have a sound currency. So we want to have a protection of the general welfare, the general environment of free markets and ability to trade with each other and travel among the states. That was the responsibility of the federal government, not to run our lives and run everything in the economy and extend, you know, the Interstate Commerce Clause and the General Welfare Clause to do anything they want to do. That is what has happened.
So keep the peace. So defense, the military,
right,
police forces, enforce contracts, and that's about it?
That's it.
All right, so yesterday we had our debate wrap up, and the general consensus seems to be that things went all right for Ron Paul and he was treated fairly. But sadly, CNN appears to be afraid of using its own polls for its own post-game analysis. When reporting post-debate, they instead used data from a National Journal poll given to political insiders. Data taken from 5 other major poll sources post-debate showed Dr. Paul at 31.07% at Fox News, 83% at CNBC, 87% at WePolls.com. Vortex effect might have been a little biased there with the audience, 93.31%. But even at CNN's own poll, 78%. Okay, so let's be fair. The online polls can be skewed like any other form of polling, but here's the skewing that CNN came up with. There you go. Romney at 51%, down to Paul at 0. How did they get away with this? They didn't invent the numbers, as they might as well have. Instead, they reported on a national journal online poll that had all of 54 votes. And according to the Baltimore Sun, it was reported that Ron Paul clearly won audience favor in New Hampshire. An analysis of audience reaction shows Paul was applauded twice as much as any other candidate on stage. Throughout the 2-hour debate, Paul was applauded 11 times. Romney, Bachmann, and former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty were each applauded 5 times. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich and businessman Herman Cain were each applauded 4 times. Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum was applauded the least amount of times, 3. Again, 0%. Really? CNN? Well, hey, maybe this can justify a CNN shutout of Ron Paul for the next go-round. Clearly, since 2-term governors who leave their states with billion-dollar surpluses, Gary Johnson of New Mexico, don't qualify as viable debate participants. Ron should be silenced too, right? Yes, America, you see how this works? 54 votes to determine the front-runners. This is how they are selective in the narrative of the Communist News Network, ably coming to the aid of their lovable, freedom-hating, big government Republican Mitt Romney. This is why we at RT America probably need to host our own.
Erupted on the streets of St. Paul, where thousands continued protesting the Republican National Convention. Officials say some tried to get past security fences at the XL Center where the convention is underway. A beefed-up security force handcuffed civilians and journalists as hysteria filled the crowd. Meanwhile, across the river in Minneapolis, screams of excitement filled the air. Ron Paul greeted a sea of energized supporters with a rock star entrance. The former Republican presidential candidate was not invited to speak at his own party's convention, so instead organized his own.
Our day is coming. It's only beginning.
The Texas congressman's political platform of limited government, anti-tax, and anti-war has generated an unprecedented following among voters nationwide.
We have a vision for what this country should be, and we're going to move forward with it no matter what happens in the presidential election.
An election, many say, leaves them with no viable choice.
We see 2 candidates with 0 fundamental differences. They're still going to spend the money. They're still going to devour our economy. Their only differences are what countries to bomb tomorrow.
Once dismissed as inconsequential, Ron Paul has filled an 18,000-seat stadium. His supporters say this event is the start of a U.S. revolution, one that rejects military intervention overseas and brings liberty back to America. But Paul says neither presidential candidates, John McCain or Barack Obama, are the right men to do so.
They both want more troops in Afghanistan. They really want to maintain bases in the Middle East for a long time. They want to threaten Iran. Lo and behold, both candidates now think we should send more of your money to Georgia to protect that oil line.
Paul accuses Washington of escalating the Russia-Georgia conflict by offering NATO membership and military consultation to Tbilisi, moves his supporters denounce.
There's a certain power group in control in Western Europe and the United States which is very aggressive towards Russia, and we don't agree with that.
It's among the many messages these Americans aim to spread as the effort that began with one man has transpired into a long-lasting movement. Marina Portnaya, RT, Minneapolis.